The sun rose on the horizon of South Cross, coating the vast fields of Hope Ranch in gold. Margaret Maggie Carter, a woman with calloused hands and a steady gaze, observed her property with the pride of someone who had built a legacy. At 65, she carried on her shoulders the responsibility of keeping alive the tradition that her father, Anthony Carter, had left behind. "Sophie," she called, walking toward the main stable, "Star has been agitated since yesterday. We need to keep an eye on him." Sophie Martinez, a trusted employee for more than 2 decades, approached with hurried steps. Her tanned face, marked by the sun, showed concern. "Miss Maggie, I've tried everything. He's not eating, barely drinking water. I've never seen Star like this." Star was the most imposing buffalo on the ranch, a majestic animal with horns that seemed to sketch the sky itself when he raised his head. But that morning, something was different. His movements were erratic, his eyes seemed more alive, almost human in their expressiveness. "I've already called Dr. Louis," Maggie mentioned, adjusting the straw hat that protected her face from the relentless sun. "He should arrive today." Dr. Louis Anderson was more than a veterinarian to Maggie. He was a friend, a confidant. Graduated with honors in the city, he had chosen South Cross to build his career, attracted by the simplicity of rural life and the unique challenges the region provided. While they waited, Maggie decided to visit her father's old office, a room she rarely frequented since his passing 15 years ago. The accumulated dust told stories of abandonment, but something drove her there on this particular day. "You know, Sophie," she said, opening the window to let fresh air in, "my father was always very secretive about certain research he conducted. I remember overhearing conversations late at night, unfamiliar voices, papers being hastily put away when I appeared." Sophie simply nodded, absorbing each word like someone who understood the importance of that moment of confidence. "Perhaps there's something here that can help us understand what's happening with Star," Maggie continued, beginning to search through the old drawers of the solid wooden desk. The sound of a car interrupted the search. It was Dr. Louis arriving in his pickup truck, worn down by time and the dirt roads that crisscrossed the region. "Maggie!" he greeted, with the familiarity of years of friendship. "I came as soon as I got your message. What's wrong with Star?" The explanation was brief but sufficient for the veterinarian to understand the urgency of the situation. Together they headed to the stable where the buffalo remained restless. "I've never seen anything like it," Louis murmured after examining the animal. "His heartbeat is accelerated, his body temperature is abnormal, and there's something in his eyes, something I can't explain." It was at that moment that Maggie noticed unusual movement at the entrance of the ranch. An unfamiliar car was approaching, raising dust on the dirt road. When the vehicle stopped, a young woman of about 30 emerged with black hair and a determined expression. "Can I help you?" asked Maggie, walking toward the unexpected visitor. "My name is Caroline Parker," the young woman responded, extending her hand. "I'm Michael Parker's daughter, your neighbor. I need to talk to you about something very important, something related to your buffalo." Caroline's gaze conveyed an urgency that sent a chill down Maggie's spine. How could this young woman know about Star? What did Michael Parker's daughter, a man with whom Maggie maintained a distant relationship due to old territorial disputes, want here? "What do you mean? What do you know about my buffalo?" questioned Maggie, the distrust evident in her voice. Caroline looked around as if afraid of being overheard before responding in a low tone. "He's not just an ordinary buffalo, Miss Carter, and what's about to happen could change everything we know about this region and about ourselves." Silence hung heavy among the 3 people now gathered in the main room of the big house. Maggie served coffee while observing Caroline with an inquiring look. Dr. Louis, meanwhile, remained silent, analyzing every expression of the newcomer. "Explain yourself better, Caroline," Maggie requested, placing her cup on the mahogany table that occupied the center of the room. "What did you mean about Star not being a normal buffalo?" Caroline took a deep breath before beginning. Her fingers drummed nervously on the side of her untouched cup. "My father was never just a rancher, Ms. Carter, just as your father wasn't. Merely a cattle breeder. They participated in a project that began more than 30 years ago and was never supposed to come to light." Maggie's eyes narrowed. Fragmented memories began to emerge. The nights when her father locked himself in his office, the strange visits, the notes he always hid when she approached. "What kind of project?" questioned Dr. Lewis, breaking his contemplative silence. "Genetic modification," Caroline answered, her tone revealing a mixture of shame and concern. "They wanted to create perfect animals, stronger, more resistant, more intelligent." Maggie felt the air leave her lungs. Her father's reputation had always been impeccable in South Cross. Anthony Carter was remembered as an upright, generous man, a pillar of the community. How could he have been involved in something like this? "And how do you know all this?" asked Maggie, the suspicion evident in her voice. "My father kept documents, reports, notes, photographs. He never knew I found them," explained Caroline, her eyes fixed on a distant point as if reliving the moment of discovery. "For years, I kept this secret to myself. I thought the project had been abandoned, that it was nothing more than a failed ambition from decades ago." Dr. Lewis stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the stable where Star remained. This would explain the buffalo's abnormal behavior, he pondered. But why now? Why after so many years? Caroline finally faced them directly. Because the project was never really abandoned. It was just dormant. And now, something has awakened it. The conversation was interrupted by the shrill sound of the telephone. Maggie answered, her face paling with each word heard. "That was Sophie," she said after hanging up. "We need to go to the stable now. Star is different." The three ran toward the indicated location. Upon arrival, they found Sophie paralyzed. At the entrance, her eyes fixed on the interior of the enclosure. Inside, Star seemed transformed. His coat, once black as coal, now displayed metallic reflections that shone even in the dim light of the stable. His eyes, more alive than ever, seemed to observe them with a disturbing comprehension. "My God," whispered Dr. Lewis, cautiously approaching the animal. "This is impossible." Star moved, not erratically as before, but with frightening precision. He approached the bars that separated him from the humans and, to everyone's astonishment, inclined his head as if making a bow. "Is he recognizing us?" asked Sophie, her voice trembling. "Not just recognizing," replied Caroline, taking a step forward. "He's understanding, comprehending who we are, what we're saying." Maggie felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the nearby. While trying to process what she was seeing, what did they do to him? What did my father and your father do? Caroline hesitated before answering. "They tried to create conscious life, Ms. Carter, but the project went beyond what they imagined. The modified animals didn't show significant results at the time, and most of the research was archived. But it seems the modified DNA remained dormant, waiting for the right moment to manifest itself." "And why did you decide to come here today?" questioned Dr. Lewis, his gaze alternating between Caroline and the transformed buffalo. "Because it's not just Star," she revealed, her voice almost a whisper. "On my father's ranch, 3 calves were born last week, all with unusual characteristics. And last night, one of them escaped from the pen as if it understood exactly how the lock mechanism worked." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Through the stable window, they saw a luxurious pickup truck park near the main house. From the vehicle emerged a tall man with graying hair and an imposing posture, Michael Parker. "My father," murmured Caroline, the fear evident in her voice. "He can't know I'm here. He can't discover that you know." "Why?" asked Maggie, confusion, giving way to determination. "What does he intend to do?" Caroline looked directly into Maggie's eyes, the seriousness of her words palpable in the air. "He wants to control what's happening, and he believes the only way to do that is by eliminating any evidence of the project, including the affected animals and anyone who knows about them." "Hide," whispered Sophie, pushing Caroline behind a pile of hay. "I'll distract him." Dr. Louis and Maggie exchanged tense looks, silently deciding to remain with the buffalo. Sophie left the stable, adjusting her hair and clothes as if nothing unusual was happening. Through the small side window, Maggie watched Sophie approach Michael Parker with a forced smile. The man, in his impeccable suit that looked out of place in the rural environment seemed irritated. His gestures were abrupt as he questioned Sophie, who maintained her composure, occasionally pointing in the direction opposite to the stable. "He's looking for me," murmured Caroline, peeping through the cracks of her improvised barricade. "I must have been followed." Dr. Lewis, meanwhile, continued to examine Star with scientific fascination and moral horror. The buffalo remained serene, his now deep blue eyes fixed on the veterinarian as if trying to communicate something. "Look at this, Maggie," he called in a low voice. "His body temperature is normalizing, but something in the bone structure seems to be changing. It's as if the body is adapting to a new configuration." Maggie approached cautiously. In all her life on the ranch, she had never witnessed anything similar. Raised among animals, she knew every behavior, every sign. But Star transcended any previous knowledge. "What will we do when Michael leaves?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We can't simply ignore what's happening." Caroline, still hidden, replied, "We need specialized help. Someone who understands genetics, who can analyze what's happening with Star and the other affected animals." "I know someone," intervened Dr. Lewis, his eyes never leaving the buffalo. "An old college colleague, Dr. Helen Vance. She works with genetic research at the State University. If anyone can help us understand this, it's her." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the conversation. The stable door opened slowly and Sophie entered, her face pale. "He's gone, but he said he'll be back tomorrow," she informed them. "He's looking for you," Caroline said. "He has pending matters with his rebel daughter." Caroline emerged from her hiding place, fear evident in every movement. "He knows I discovered the documents. He must have noticed some important papers are missing." Maggie made a quick decision. "You'll stay here tonight, Caroline. Sophie, prepare the guest room. Dr. Lewis, could you contact that researcher you mentioned?" The veterinarian nodded, already taking out his cell phone. "I'll call her right away." While the others organized themselves, Maggie remained beside Star. There was something in the animal's presence that comforted her, despite the strangeness of the situation. "What are you trying to tell us, big guy?" she murmured, gently caressing the buffalo's muzzle. To her surprise, Star responded with a delicate movement of his head, as if he perfectly understood the question. His eyes, more expressive than ever, seemed to contain secrets that were just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Night fell over Hope Ranch, bringing with it a quietude charged with tension. In the main house around the kitchen table, the small group discussed strategies. "Helen agreed to come," informed Dr. Lewis. "She'll be here tomorrow morning. She said she'll bring equipment for preliminary analyses." "And what about my father?" questioned Caroline, nervously fidgeting with the food on her plate. "He won't give up easily." Maggie served more coffee before responding. "We'll deal with Michael when necessary. For now, our priority is to understand what's happening with Star." Sophie, who had been quiet until then, spoke. "There's one more thing. When Michael was leaving, I received a call from Pete, the worker at the western fence. He said he saw strange lights near the creek, at the border with the Parkers' property." The news caused general apprehension. The creek marked the boundary between the two properties and was a relatively isolated area. "What kind of lights?" asked Dr. Louis. He couldn't explain properly. He said they looked like flashlights but more intense, and that there were several people moving around. Caroline turned pale. "He's bringing reinforcements," she murmured. "When I discovered the documents, I found mentions of other project participants, businessmen, scientists, even government people. If my father contacted them..." The sound of a telephone interrupted the conversation. It was Dr. Lewis's cell phone. "It's Helen," he informed after checking the message. "She managed to move up her trip. She'll be here in 2 hours." The news brought brief relief, soon replaced by new concern when Sophie, who had gone to check on Star, returned breathlessly to the kitchen. "You need to see this," she said, her eyes wide. "Star, he's different again." They all ran to the stable, guided by the weak light of Sophie's flashlight. Upon arrival, they encountered a surreal scene. Star, now completely transformed, had his horns shining like polished metal, and his coat displayed geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own life. My God, whispered Caroline. It's happening faster than I imagined. Dr. Lewis approached cautiously, extending his hand to touch the animal. To everyone's astonishment, Starr deliberately moved his head, avoiding contact. He's conscious, concluded the veterinarian, not just in the animal sense, but as an entity that comprehends its surroundings, that makes decisions based on complex reasoning. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. The revelation brought frightening implications. What will we do now? She questioned, looking at each of those present. It was Caroline who answered, her voice acquiring an unexpected firmness. We need to protect him. Starr isn't just a modified animal. He's the beginning of something that neither my father nor yours could foresee. And if we don't act quickly, Michael and his allies will do everything to hide what they created, even if it means destroying the only living proof that their experiment worked. Rain began to fall when Dr. Helen Vance's car passed through the gates of Hope Ranch. Heavy drops drummed on the vehicle's roof, creating a tense melody that seemed to reflect everyone's state of mind on the property. Maggie waited on the porch, watching the scientist emerge from the car with a suitcase in one hand and a silver case in the other. Helen was a woman of average height, with brown hair tied in a disheveled bun and penetrating eyes that exuded intelligence. Margaret Carter, she greeted, quickly climbing the steps to escape the rain. It's been a long time. I'm sorry our reunion happens under these circumstances. Maggie nodded, leading the newcomer inside the house. The two had met years ago during an agricultural symposium held in the city. Since then, they had maintained sporadic contact, more out of courtesy than any real affinity. Lewis briefed me on the situation by phone, continued Helen, placing her case on the table in the living room. I confess it seemed too fantastic to be true, but your reputation convinced me to come verify personally. Dr. Louis, who had just entered the room from the kitchen, extended his hand to his colleague. Thank you for coming so quickly, Helen. The situation is more complex than I could explain over the phone. Sophie appeared carrying a tray with coffee, while Caroline remained recessed in a corner of the room, observing the newcomer with evident distrust. This is Caroline Parker, introduced Maggie. Michael Parker's daughter, my neighbor, she was the one who alerted us about the situation. Helen studied the young woman for a few moments before briefly nodding. Parker, the name is familiar. I believe I read articles signed by a Michael Parker during my research on animal hybridization in the 1990s. Caroline swallowed hard, confirming with an almost imperceptible movement. My father participated in many research projects over the years. Not all were adequately disclosed. A tense silence established itself, broken only by the sound of the rain that now fell with more intensity. I think we better get straight to the point, intervened Dr. Lewis. The buffalo is in the main stable, and with each passing hour, we notice more significant changes. Helen adjusted her glasses, an expression of genuine scientific curiosity taking over her face. Let's go then. The group crossed the muddy yard under the protection of umbrellas, heading to the stable where Starr was housed. Upon entering, Helen stopped abruptly, her wide eyes fixed on the animal before her. Extraordinary, she murmured, approaching cautiously. Completely extraordinary. Starr, who apparently slept, raised his head upon noticing them. His eyes, now an even more intense blue, immediately focused on the unfamiliar scientist. The buffalo stood up in a fluid movement, almost feline in its grace, and walked to the bars that separated him from the humans. He recognizes new people, explained Maggie, and seems to assess their intentions somehow. Helen placed her case on the ground and opened it, revealing a series of sophisticated equipment. She extracted a device that looked like a portable scanner and looked at Maggie. May I approach him? I believe so, as long as your movements are slow and predictable. He has shown himself to be peaceful but cautious. The scientist nodded and, with deliberately slow steps, approached the bars. Starr remained motionless, his eyes never leaving Helen's face. Hello, big guy, she murmured, extending her free hand in a gesture of peace. I'm just going to do some tests, all right? To everyone's astonishment, the buffalo slightly lowered his head, as if granting permission. Helen activated the scanner, passing it near the animal's body without touching it. "This is a biosignature reader," she explained to the others. "It detects alterations in the bioelectric field and superficial cellular composition. It's experimental. Technology, but extremely useful for non-invasive analyses." The device emitted a low hum as the scientist methodically moved it. After a few minutes, she retreated, her eyes fixed on the small screen of the device. "Unbelievable," she murmured. "His cellular structure is in constant adaptation. It's as if the DNA was rewriting itself in real time." "Is that possible?" questioned Dr. Lewis, the incredulity evident in his voice. Helen put away the scanner before responding. "Theoretically, no. But we're facing living proof that someone discovered how to make it happen." Caroline took a step forward, speaking for the first time since they had entered the stable. "The documents I found mentioned something called Project Genesis. They talked about advanced genetic modification, about creating a new generation of evolved animals. But I always thought it was just speculation, theoretical research without practical application." Helen stared at her intensely. "Where are those documents now?" "I hid some in my house, others I brought with me," replied Caroline, removing a folded envelope from the inside pocket of her jacket. "They're just fragments, but perhaps they'll help understand what's happening." The scientist took the envelope with evident anxiety, but before she could open it, Sophie, who had been keeping watch through the window, alerted. "There's a car approaching. It looks like Michael Parker's." Caroline turned pale. "He can't find me here, and he can't see Dr. Vance either." Maggie made a quick decision. "Sophie, take Helen and Caroline through the back to the caretaker's house. Stay there until it's safe. Louis and I will deal with Michael." While the three women hurriedly left through the back of the stable, Maggie and Dr. Lewis prepared for the imminent confrontation. Star, sensing the tension in the environment, emitted a low sound, almost a murmur, that seemed to want to transmit some message. "He senses it, Maggie," commented Louis, looking at the buffalo. "He understands that we're in danger." Maggie nodded, her eyes fixed on the stable door, waiting for Michael Parker's arrival. The man who had once been her father's partner and who now represented a threat to everything she valued. "Whatever happens, Louis," she said, her voice firm despite the fear, "we need to protect Star, not just for what he is, but for what he represents." The rain intensified, transforming the ranch yard into a muddy field and creating a curtain of water that distorted vision. Michael Parker descended from his luxurious pickup truck, protecting himself with a black umbrella. His rigid posture and determined look revealed that he hadn't come for a social visit. Maggie waited for him at the stable door, Dr. Lewis by her side. Both had decided not to retreat to the main house, preferring to keep Michael away from where Star was housed. "Margaret Carter," Michael greeted dryly as he approached. "What a surprise to find you out here in this weather." "My ranch, my choice, Michael," she responded, maintaining her composure. "What brings you here again?" Michael shook his umbrella before closing it, his eyes scanning the environment as if looking for something or someone. "I'm looking for my daughter. Caroline left yesterday without notice and hasn't returned. I have reason to believe she might be here." Dr. Lewis stepped forward, extending his hand to greet the visitor. "Mr. Parker, I'm Dr. Lewis Anderson, the veterinarian responsible for the ranch's animals." Michael shook the offered hand with evident disinterest. "I don't believe we need introductions, Doctor. Your reputation in the region precedes you." Turning to Maggie, he continued, "Well, is my daughter here?" The storm raged around them, occasional lightning illuminating the darkened sky. Maggie maintained a steady gaze as she answered, "I haven't seen her since last year's Harvest Festival, Michael. Why do you think she would be here?" A humorless smile formed on the rancher's lips. "Don't underestimate me, Maggie. Caroline took some important documents from my house, documents that should have remained secret, and her car was seen near your property yesterday." A particularly strong thunder shook the ground beneath their feet. Dr. Louis took advantage of the moment to intervene. "Mr. Parker, we're in the middle of a delicate situation here. One of Ms. Carter's buffaloes is showing inexplicable symptoms. That's why we're at the stable. Michael's interest seemed to awaken immediately. What kind of symptoms? Fever, agitation, erratic behavior, replied the veterinarian deliberately, omitting the more extraordinary details. It could be a new viral strain, which is why we're keeping the animal isolated. Michael took a step toward the stable door. I'd like to see it. I have some experience with rare diseases in bovines. Maggie moved quickly, blocking his path. Impossible. The quarantine protocol is rigorous, Michael. Not even the ranch workers have permission to enter, only Dr. Lewis and myself. The tension between them was palpable. For a moment, Michael seemed to consider forcing his entry, but another thunder rumbled, followed by lightning that illuminated the dark sky. The rain increased in intensity, as if nature itself disapproved of the confrontation. All right, Maggie, he finally yielded, taking a step back. But know that this conversation isn't over. If you learn of my daughter's whereabouts, I expect you to inform me immediately. As Michael walked away toward his truck, a soft but distinct sound came from inside the stable. Star was emitting a sound that seemed almost human. Michael stopped, turning slowly. What was that? The wind in the metal roofing, Maggie quickly responded. This stable is old, makes all kinds of noises during storms. Michael studied Maggie's face for a long moment, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I hope, for your sake, that it's just that. There are greater forces involved in this story, Maggie, forces that neither you nor I can control alone. With those enigmatic words, he returned to his vehicle. The engine roared, and the truck slowly moved away, its headlights creating luminous trails in the curtain of rain. Only when the vehicle completely disappeared from view did Maggie allow herself to relax her shoulders. He knows Lewis. Somehow he knows about Star. The veterinarian nodded gravely. And he won't give up easily. We need to act quickly. Upon entering the stable, they found Star agitated, moving from side to side as if he sensed the tension of the moment. His luminous blue eyes followed the two humans as they approached. He felt Michael's presence, observed Maggie, extending her hand to calm the animal, and reacted to it. Dr. Louis studied the buffalo with growing admiration and concern. Maggie, we need to seriously consider what this means. If Star has truly developed an advanced consciousness, we're facing something that transcends everything we know about animal evolution. The sound of the back door opening interrupted the conversation. Sophie entered completely soaked, followed by Helen and Caroline. Is he gone? Asked Caroline, the fear evident in her trembling voice. For now, replied Maggie. But he'll return, and he won't be alone next time. Helen approached Star, her eyes shining with scientific fascination. While we were in the caretaker's house, I analyzed the documents Caroline brought, she said, not taking her eyes off the buffalo. Project Genesis was much more ambitious than we imagined. It wasn't just about creating enhanced animals, but developing a new form of consciousness, a new stage in the evolution of life on Earth. Dawn arrived, bringing a respite in the storm. In the kitchen of the main house, the small group gathered. Around the table, cups of strong coffee in front of them and documents spread across the wooden surface. No one had slept. The urgency of the situation did not allow such luxury. Project Genesis began in the 1980s, explained Helen, pointing to a series of documents yellowed by time. It was a private initiative funded by visionary ranchers and some anonymous investors. With government contacts, your father, Ms. Carter, and yours, Caroline, were among the pioneers. Maggie held an old photograph where her father, Anthony Carter, appeared alongside Michael Parker, both much younger, in an improvised laboratory. The date in the corner indicated March 1985. I never imagined, she murmured, running her finger over the faded image. My father was always so traditional in his methods. How did he get involved with something so revolutionary? Helen adjusted her glasses before continuing. According to these reports, the initial objective was to create genetically superior farm animals, more resistant to diseases, more productive, adaptable to extreme climatic conditions. It was a response to growing concerns about global food security. "And when did that change?" asked Dr. Lewis, leafing through another set of documents. "In 1992, replied Caroline, pulling a folder she had kept close to herself. "That's when Dr. Edward Santos joined the project. He was a geneticist, specialized in neuroscience and cognitive evolution. In his first notes, he already suggested that genetic modifications could affect not only physical characteristics, but also the neurological development of animals." Sophie, who was preparing more coffee, momentarily interrupted her task. "Are you saying they tried to create intelligent animals on purpose?" Helen sighed deeply. "Not just intelligent, Sophie, conscious, with the capacity for abstract reasoning, perhaps even complex communication." A heavy silence settled in the kitchen, broken only by the sound of rain now falling gently on the roof. "The experiments were considered failures in 1997, continued Caroline. "The modified animals didn't show the expected capabilities, at least not immediately. The funding was cut and the project officially ended, but my father, he never really abandoned the idea. And now, decades later, STAR begins to manifest exactly the characteristics they were looking for," concluded Dr. Louis. "How is that possible?" Helen stood up, walking to the window to observe the sky that was beginning to clear on the horizon. The genetic modifications must have remained dormant in the animal's genetic code, passing from generation to generation. Something must have activated this genetic key recently. "But what?" questioned Maggie. The scientist turned to the group, her face revealing the intensity of her reflections. "The data I collected from STAR shows elevated levels of a specific protein in his organism, a protein that doesn't naturally exist in buffaloes or any other known animal." "And where would this protein come from?" asked Dr. Lewis, intrigued. "That's the most fascinating part," replied Helen, a gleam of scientific excitement in her eyes. "I believe it's being produced by STAR's own body as a response to some environmental trigger." Caroline frowned, rapidly leafing through the documents in front of her until finding what she was looking for. "Here," she exclaimed, pointing to a specific page. Dr. Santos mentioned this in his last notes. He theorized that the genetic modifications could remain latent until specific conditions were met, like a kind of programmed evolution. Sophie, who had remained mostly silent, intervened. "The fertilizer." Everyone turned to her, confused. 3 months ago, we started using a new type of fertilizer in the pastures where STAR feeds, explained Sophie. An imported product, highly concentrated. The representative guaranteed it was completely natural, derived from rare marine algae. Helen and Lewis exchanged significant looks. "A change in diet could theoretically activate certain genetic sequences," conceded the scientist, "especially if that fertilizer contains specific components that interact with the modified DNA." "And who supplied this fertilizer?" asked Caroline. Sophie's face paled slightly. "A company called Neocrop, a subsidiary of Parker Agribusiness Group." All heads turned to Caroline, who seemed as surprised as the others. I didn't know," she stammered. "My father maintains many businesses I'm unaware of. I was always kept away from company decisions." Maggie stood up abruptly, her eyes widened with sudden understanding. It wasn't a coincidence. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. He reactivated the project, using my ranch as a laboratory without my knowledge. The indignation in her voice was palpable. Dr. Louis placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "If that's true, we need to discover what else he's planning. And we need to protect STAR. He's living proof of what's happening." Helen gathered the scattered documents, organizing them methodically. "We need more information. Caroline, are there other records in your father's house? Something that might give us clues about his true objectives?" Caroline hesitated, nervously biting her lower lip. "In his office, there's a safe. I never managed to open it, but I'm sure important documents are kept there. And there's also the underground laboratory." "Underground laboratory?" repeated Sophie, incredulous. "Yes, built under the old barn. Very few people have access. Even I only discovered its existence 2 years ago by accident." The rising sun was beginning to cast its first rays through the kitchen window, illuminating the tired but determined faces. We need to act quickly, decided Maggie. Michael will certainly return, and this time he'll be prepared. Helen stored the documents in her folder before speaking. I suggest we divide our forces. We need to continue monitoring Star, obtain more information about Michael's plans, and try to better understand the capabilities the Buffalo is developing. I can. Return to my father's ranch, offered Caroline, her face showing determination despite the obvious fear. I know the property better than anyone and can try to access the laboratory. Too risky, countered Louis. Michael will be vigilant, especially now. Maggie, who was watching the sunrise through the window, turned to the group. We have a trump. Card that Michael doesn't expect, she said, a small smile forming on her lips. Star is no longer just an animal. If he's really developed the capabilities we suspect, perhaps he can help us more than we imagine. The morning advanced as the group headed to the stable. The sky, now clear after the storm, displayed a deep blue that contrasted with the intensified green of the vegetation. Birds sang, as if the world continued its normal course, oblivious to the extraordinary events at Hope Ranch. Upon entering the stable, they encountered a surprising scene. Star was standing in the center of the enclosure, completely motionless, his bright blue eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for them. The transformation that had occurred during the night was even more evident in daylight. His coat, now with distinct metallic reflections, seemed to pulse with its own life. His horns, previously curved and opaque, now projected majestically, with an almost silver shine. He knew we were coming, murmured Sophie, a shiver running down her spine. Helen approached cautiously, her scanner already in hand. His brain activity levels are extraordinary, she commented, observing the data on the small monitor of the device. I've never seen anything like it in any known species. Maggie, moved by an inexplicable intuition, opened the door of the stall where Star was confined. Dr. Lewis made a motion to stop her, but something in the woman's determined look detained him. Maggie, are you sure? He questioned, his voice betraying concern. She nodded, without taking her eyes off the buffalo. He won't hurt me, I know that. With deliberately slow steps, Maggie entered the animal's space. Star remained motionless, only his eyes following the woman's movement. When she extended her hand, gently touching his muzzle, a collective sigh of tension was audible in the stable. Hello, old friend, she murmured, a gentle smile on her lips. We know you understand what's happening and we need your help. To everyone's astonishment, Star slightly inclined his head as if making a bow. His eyes, more expressive than ever, seemed to communicate a deep understanding. This is unbelievable, whispered Helen, her scanner capturing every movement. His neural activity increases in direct response to your voice, Ms. Carter. It's as if he's processing not just the words, but their emotional context. Caroline, who had maintained a safe distance, took a step forward. Can we really count on his help? How? Dr. Lewis, overcoming his initial hesitation, joined Maggie inside the stall. If he truly possesses the intelligence we suspect, perhaps we can develop a method of basic communication, suggested the veterinarian. Something simple, like yes or no answers. Maybe we can go beyond that, intervened Helen, her eyes shining with scientific possibilities. In my case, I have a prototype neural interface. It was developed to study communication patterns in primates, but theoretically, it could work with any animal that possesses complex brain activity. While the scientist hurriedly returned to the house to fetch the equipment, Maggie continued her silent connection with Star. There was something almost mystical in the way animal and human communicated without words, a mutual understanding that transcended species barriers. He trusts you, observed Sophie with admiration. He always has. Maggie nodded, recalling the long years since Star was born on the ranch. I've been with him since day one. Perhaps that's why our connection is so strong. A few minutes later, Helen returned with a device that looked like a technological crown, composed of sensors and small lights. This will translate the electrical impulses from his brain into recognizable patterns, she explained, adjusting the equipment. Don't expect philosophical conversations, but we'll be able to understand basic sensations, primary intentions, maybe even rudimentary mental images. The installation of the device was surprisingly calm. Star remained cooperative, as if he perfectly understood the purpose of the procedure. When everything was ready, Helen connected the device to a tablet she had brought with her. "Now let's test it," she said, activating the system. "Star, if you can understand me, think of something simple, a clear image like water." The tablet emitted a soft beep, and on the screen appeared a wavy pattern of blue lines. "My God, it worked!" exclaimed Helen, her voice mixing astonishment and scientific excitement. He really understood and responded. In the following minutes, the group watched in wonder as basic communication was established. The Star consistently responded to simple commands, demonstrating not only comprehension, but also initiative, sometimes offering unsolicited mental images. "He's trying to tell us something," realized Dr. Lewis, observing a repetitive sequence of patterns on the tablet. "Something about the laboratory?" Caroline approached to better examine the images. "It looks like the neocrop symbol," she said, pointing to a specific pattern. "And this resembles the entrance to the underground laboratory on my father's ranch." Maggie looked directly into Star's eyes. "You know about the laboratory, how?" The tablet displayed a sequence of images: green fields, the fertilizer being applied, and then something that looked like a genetic memory, like entwined DNA filaments. "Fascinating," murmured Helen. "It seems he has access to memories that aren't exactly his, perhaps genetically encoded memories, passed through generations since the first experiments." Understanding hit the group like a wave. Star possessed knowledge about Project Genesis that none of them had. Through him, they could unravel the secrets that Michael Parker and his allies were desperately trying to keep hidden. "We need a plan," declared Maggie, her gaze traveling over each of those present. "Michael will certainly return, and he won't be alone. We have to be prepared." Dr. Lewis nodded, his expression grave. "And we need to document all this. The world needs to know what's happening here." "Don't even think about it," Caroline abruptly intervened, the fear evident in her voice. "My father has powerful allies. If they suspect we're about to expose the project, they won't hesitate to silence all of us." Sophie, who had been keeping watch through the window, interrupted the discussion. "We have visitors," she announced, her tone urgent. "3 cars entering the property. One of them is your father's, Caroline." Star emitted a low sound, almost a moan. The tablet connected to his neural device displayed an alarming image: flames, destruction, and something that looked like a weapon. "He's trying to warn us," understood Maggie, feeling the chill of fear spread through her body. "They didn't come to negotiate. They came to eliminate the evidence, and us along with it." "How much time do we have?" asked Dr. Lewis, his voice betraying the urgency of the moment. Sophie peered through the window again, calculating the distance. 3 minutes, maybe less. They're approaching rapidly. Maggie took command of the situation with the firmness of someone who had spent her life making difficult decisions. "We can't face them directly. There are too many, and they're probably armed," she declared, her gaze traveling over the small group. "We need to split up." Helen was already hurriedly storing her equipment in the case. "The data I collected from Star must be preserved at all costs. It's the scientific proof of what's happening here." "The back trail," suggested Sophie quickly. "It passes by the creek and leads to the secondary road. I have an old pickup stored in the east shed that almost nobody knows about." Maggie nodded, formulating a plan. "Helen and Caroline, you two will go by the trail with the documents and the data. Sophie will guide you. Dr. Lewis and I will stay to distract Michael and his men." "And what about Star?" questioned Dr. Lewis, looking at the magnificent animal that seemed to perfectly understand the gravity of the situation. The tablet, connected to the buffalo's neural device, displayed a clear image: Star running freely through the fields, followed by other animals similar to him. "He wants to free himself," interpreted Caroline, surprised, "and it seems he's not alone in this transformation." Maggie looked deeply into Star's conscious blue eyes. "Do you know where to go? Are there others like you?" The tablet showed images of the most distant pasture area of the ranch, near the border with still unexplored lands. followed by silhouettes of other buffaloes with the same metallic reflections in their coats. "The animals from the south lot," understood Sophie. "We bought 6 of them at the same auction as Star. All were fed with grass, treated with the same fertilizer." Helen finished storing her equipment, the scientific fascination momentarily overcome by the urgency of the escape. "We need to remove his neural device," she said, approaching Star. "We can't risk it falling into the wrong hands." While the scientist quickly worked to remove the device, Maggie reviewed the final instructions. "Sophie, as soon as you reach the secondary road, head to the neighboring town, not South Cross. Look for Sheriff Ernest Wilson. He's an old friend of my father and a person of absolute trust. Give him all the documents and explain the situation." Caroline hesitated, the internal conflict evident on her face. "Maggie, my father isn't a bad man. He just got carried away by ambition and the power that the project promised. Maybe we can make him understand." Maggie interrupted her gently. "Now is not the time to try to redeem him, Caroline. The priority is to ensure everyone's safety and preserve the evidence. Later, there will be time for conversations and explanations." The sound of vehicles parking near the main house confirmed the urgency of the situation. Helen finished removing Star's neural device, carefully storing it in her case. "Ready," she announced. "And what about Star?" Dr. Louis was already moving to open the back door of the stable, which gave direct access to the pastures. "He knows where to go. We need to trust his instincts now." Maggie approached the impressive animal one last time, caressing his muzzle with a mixture of affection and sadness. "Go, friend, find the others. We'll be together again when it's safe." Star emitted a low sound, almost a human murmur, and inclined his head in a gesture that seemed like a farewell. His blue eyes fixed on Maggie's for one last moment before he turned and, with surprising grace for an animal of his size, dashed toward the open fields. The 3 women hurried toward the back trail, carrying the precious documents and equipment, while Maggie and Dr. Lewis prepared for the imminent confrontation. "What will we tell them?" asked the veterinarian, the tension evident in his voice. Maggie took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she could. "We'll play with the truth, or at least part of it. We'll say Star showed abnormal behavior and escaped, that I called you for an emergency consultation, and that we have no idea what's happening." Lewis nodded, admiring his friend's composure in the face of crisis. "And if they insist on looking for Caroline?" "We'll deny having seen any sign of her," Maggie responded firmly. "Michael may be powerful, but this is still my property. Without a warrant, he has no right to search anything." She had barely finished speaking when strong knocks sounded on the stable door. Exchanging one last look of determination, the 2 went to face Michael Parker and his men. Upon opening the door, they found themselves facing the rancher accompanied by 4 men of severe appearance, all dressed in dark suits that completely clashed with the rural environment. Behind them, an older man with graying hair and thin-framed glasses observed everything with clinical interest. "Maggie," Michael greeted, his tone falsely cordial. "I see Dr. Anderson is still here. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "We were just concluding an emergency consultation," replied Maggie, keeping her voice firm despite her racing heart. "One of my buffaloes showed strange behavior and ended up escaping." The man with glasses stepped forward, his interest visibly aroused. "What kind of strange behavior exactly?" he asked, his voice carrying scientific authority. Dr. Lewis intervened, assuming his professional role. "Extreme agitation, alterations in coat pigmentation, dilated pupils. I initially suspected some bacterial infection, but the symptoms don't correspond to any known disease." Michael introduced the man with a dismissive gesture. "This is Dr. Edward Santos, researcher and consultant for Neocrop. He came at my request to investigate possible adverse effects of our products." Edward Santos. The name hit Maggie like lightning. The same scientist mentioned in the old documents, one of the original creators of Project Genesis. He was alive and apparently still involved with the research. "Interesting," commented the scientist, his perceptive eyes carefully studying the empty stable. "And where did the animal escape to?" "We believe to the extreme south of the property," replied Maggie, maintaining a steady gaze. "I've already sent some workers to try to locate him. Michael seemed impatient with the scientific conversation. "Maggie, let's get straight to the point. I have reasons to believe that my daughter Caroline is on your property. I demand you tell me where she is." Maggie maintained Michael's gaze without faltering. Decades of managing the ranch had taught her to keep her composure even in the most tense situations. "I haven't seen Caroline since last year's harvest festival, Michael. And even if she were here, your daughter is an adult woman, free to come and go as she pleases." One of the suited men whispered something in Michael's ear, who briefly nodded before turning his attention back to Maggie. "Let me be frank, Maggie. I know exactly what's happening with your buffalo. The same phenomenon occurred on my property a few weeks ago. The difference is that I was prepared for it." Dr. Lewis and Maggie exchanged quick glances, trying to maintain neutral expressions despite their surprise. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael," she replied, buying time. "Dr. Edward?" Santos stepped forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of scientific curiosity and poorly disguised ambition. "Mrs. Carter, we are witnessing an extraordinary occurrence, something that my colleagues and I have pursued for more than 3 decades. The genetic modifications we implanted in the animals have finally manifested, exactly as we theorized." "Genetic modifications," Maggie repeated, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" Michael smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't play dumb, Maggie. Your father, Anthony, was one of the founders of Project Genesis, just like me. He may have chosen to abandon the research, but the modified DNA remained present in the herd, passing from generation to generation." "With all due respect, Mr. Parker," Dr. Louis intervened, "that sounds like science fiction, not veterinary medicine or animal husbandry." Edward Santos removed a tablet from the inside pocket of his jacket and turned it on, displaying images that made Dr. Lewis's eyes widen. On the screen, a bull with characteristics similar to Star's was subjected to various tests in a laboratory environment. "As you can see, Doctor, it's not fiction," declared the scientist with evident pride. "We are witnessing the next step in evolution, animals with advanced cognitive abilities, superhuman resistance, unprecedented adaptability." Maggie felt a shiver run down her spine as she understood the true extent of the project. "And what exactly do you intend to do with these animals?" Michael laughed briefly, as if the question were naive. "The potential is unlimited, Maggie. Imagine armies of super-intelligent animals. Imagine the medical applications, the advances in food production, the commercial possibilities. Whoever controls this technology will control the future." Dr. Louis couldn't hide his horror. "You're creating biological weapons? Is that it?" The scientist seemed offended. "I prefer the term directed evolution, Doctor. We're merely accelerating processes that would naturally take millions of years to occur." During all this time, one of the suited men had discreetly disappeared, presumably to search the property for Caroline and the documents. Now he returned, making a subtle negative gesture to Michael. The rancher frowned, his patience clearly running out. "Where is my daughter, Maggie? And don't try to deceive me. I know she was here, and I know she brought confidential documents with her." "I already told you I haven't seen her, Michael," Maggie responded firmly. "And as for confidential documents, I have no idea what you're talking about." The rancher made an abrupt gesture, and 2 of his men advanced toward Maggie. Dr. Lewis tried to intervene but was easily restrained. "This ranch belonged to one of the founders of Project Genesis," declared Michael, his tone now openly threatening. "By right, everything that happens here related to the project is of our interest. I won't ask again, where is the transformed buffalo?" Before Maggie could respond, a distant sound caught everyone's attention. Coming from the southern direction of the property, a powerful bellow echoed across the fields, followed by another and another. These weren't normal buffalo sounds, but something more complex, almost melodic. Dr. Santos turned pale. "My God, they're communicating," he murmured. "The manifestation is occurring more rapidly than we anticipated." Michael turned to his men. "Go." "There now. I want all the transformed animals captured and transported to the laboratory immediately." As the men ran to their vehicles, Michael faced Maggie one last time. "This isn't a battle you can win, Maggie. What's happening here is bigger than all of us. Join us or get out of the way." Without waiting for a response, he headed to his luxurious pickup truck, followed by Dr. Santos. As the vehicles moved away toward the south of the property, Dr. Lewis and Maggie remained momentarily stunned by the swiftness of events. "We need to warn Sophie and the others," the veterinarian finally said. "They're in danger if they're intercepted." Maggie was already running toward the main house. "I'll try to call Sophie's cell phone. You take the jeep and try to catch up with Michael and his men. Observe what they're doing, but keep a safe distance." They separated, each with their urgent mission. While Maggie frantically dialed, she looked through the living room window, toward the distant fields where Star and the other buffaloes had taken refuge. Part of her feared for the fate of the extraordinary animals, but another part, deeper and more instinctive, felt they wouldn't be captured easily. After several frustrated attempts to contact Sophie, Maggie heard an engine approaching. She ran to the porch, expecting to see Dr. Lewis's jeep returning, but found herself facing an unknown vehicle. From inside it, a middle-aged man with graying hair and military posture descended. He wore a visible police badge on his belt. "Margaret Carter?" he asked, climbing the porch steps. "I'm Sheriff Ernest Wilson. I received a very interesting visit at the Pleasant View station a short while ago." Relief coursed through Maggie's body like a wave. "They managed to reach you?" The sheriff nodded, his experienced gaze scanning the property. "Sophie, Helen, and Caroline briefed me on the situation. The documents they showed me are impressive, to say the least. But I need to see for myself what's happening here. You see, Sound of an engine interrupted the conversation. Dr. Louis was returning in his jeep, the expression on his face indicating he brought urgent news. "Maggie," he called, jumping from the still-moving vehicle. "The buffaloes, they simply vanished. Michael and his men are furious, searching every inch of the southern area, but it's as if the animals evaporated into thin air." Ernest Wilson observed the scene with growing interest. "Dr. Lewis Anderson, I presume." He extended his hand to the veterinarian. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Maggie felt a strange sense of calm take hold of her, despite the turbulence around her. Something told her that Star and the other buffaloes were safe, following a path that no human could predict or control. "Yes, Sheriff, we have a lot to talk about," she agreed, inviting the two men inside. "But first, there's something I need to show you." 3 weeks passed since the confrontation at Hope Ranch. The main house, which had always been a place of simplicity and work, had temporarily transformed into an investigation center. Federal authorities, independent scientists, and carefully selected journalists had taken turns at the location, analyzing evidence and documenting the extraordinary case of the conscious buffaloes of South Cross. On that sunny spring morning, Maggie observed the movement from the porch, a cup of hot coffee between her hands. Beside her, Helen organized some papers, preparing for another interview with the investigators. "How are the data analyses going?" asked Maggie, observing the horizon where the sun rose lazily. Helen smiled, her tired but bright eyes shining with scientific excitement. "Extraordinary. The genetic material collected from Star's hair reveals modifications that defy everything we know about genetic engineering. It's as if the DNA had developed the ability to rewrite itself, continuously adapting to the environment." Dr. Lewis joined them, bringing more coffee. "The tests on the neocrop fertilizer confirmed our suspicions," he informed. "It contains synthetic compounds capable of activating specific genetic sequences. Basically, it was the trigger that awakened the dormant modifications in the animals." Sophie appeared at the door holding a cordless phone. "It's Sheriff Wilson," she announced. "He says he has important news." Maggie promptly answered, her face gradually lighting up with the information she received. When she finally hung up, she turned to her friends with an expression of contained triumph. "Michael Parker and Dr. Edward Santos have been formally indicted," she announced. "Unauthorized genetic manipulation, illegal experimentation, record falsification, biosafety protocol violations. The list is extensive." "And what about the others involved?" asked Helen. "The documents mentioned powerful investors, government contacts. "The investigation continues to expand," replied Maggie. Ernest said that each day new names emerge, some surprisingly influential. But the most important thing is that Project Genesis has been officially terminated and all associated laboratories have been sealed. A contemplative silence established itself among them, each absorbing the implications of the news. It was Caroline who broke the moment, approaching the group with hesitant steps. In the last weeks, she had stayed at a hotel in the neighboring town, actively collaborating with the investigations against her own father. "I managed to speak with him," she said, referring to Michael, "for the first time since all this began." Maggie indicated the empty chair beside her, inviting the young woman to join the group. "How was it?" Caroline sat down, crossing her hands on her lap. "Difficult. He still believes he was doing the right thing, that the project would bring incalculable benefits to humanity, but..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. There was something different in his eyes, as if for the first time he was questioning his own certainties. Dr. Louis gently placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "It's a start, Caroline. True redemption always begins with doubts." The sun was fully rising on the horizon when a military jeep parked near the house. From it descended Sheriff Ernest Wilson, accompanied by a man in official attire whom they had never seen before. "Good morning, everyone," Ernest greeted, climbing the porch steps. "This is Dr. Richard Mitchell from the National Biosafety Commission. He came personally to address a delicate matter." The suited man adjusted his glasses before speaking. "Ladies, gentlemen, first I want to thank you for the courage and integrity demonstrated in this case. The evidence you gathered is fundamental to understanding the extent of Project Genesis and its ramifications." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "However, I come with a specific mission: to locate the modified animals. Despite extensive searches in the last weeks, none of the buffaloes has been found. We need to ensure they're under adequate supervision for public safety reasons and, naturally, for their own welfare." Maggie exchanged glances with her companions before responding. "I understand your concern, Doctor, but I must inform you that we have no knowledge of Star's exact whereabouts or the others. They simply disappeared." Dr. Mitchell seemed skeptical. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, 7 adult buffaloes don't disappear without leaving traces. Our tracking team found footprints that abruptly end in the Headwaters Ridge region, as if the animals had consciously decided to avoid detection." "Perhaps they did," intervened Helen. "If our analyses are correct, these animals developed cognitive capabilities comparable to humans, possibly superior in some aspects. They understood the danger we represented and chose to distance themselves." "Precisely. Why we need to find them," insisted the Commission representative. "Animals with such capabilities, free in nature, represent a completely unpredictable factor. The ecological, ethical, and even social implications are incalculable." Caroline, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. "Let's take a walk, Dr. Mitchell," she invited, surprising everyone. "There's something I need to show you." Intrigued, the man followed her. The others exchanged confused looks, but Maggie made a discreet gesture, indicating they should trust Caroline. Together, they followed the pair, already heading toward one of the distant pastures. After almost half an hour of walking, Caroline stopped near a rocky formation that marked the boundary between Hope Ranch and the uninhabited lands beyond it. She pointed to the ground. "Look carefully, Doctor." On the earth, partially covered by low vegetation, there were distinct marks, not common buffalo footprints but deliberately traced symbols, concentric circles, lines that crossed at precise angles, patterns resembling constellations. "What is this?" asked Dr. Mitchell, kneeling to examine them better. "Communication," Caroline answered simply. "They've been returning during the night. They leave these marks and then return to wherever they're taking refuge." Helen was already photographing the symbols with her cell phone, fascinated. "I've already identified patterns similar to mathematical representations of Fibonacci sequences. This isn't random, it's a structured language." The Commission representative seemed torn between skepticism and amazement. Are you suggesting they're trying to communicate with us? That they've developed their own form of writing? Maggie approached, crouching to touch one of the symbols with reverence. Not just that, Doctor. They're telling us they've chosen their own path, that they aren't anyone's property, nor objects of study or exploitation. Dr. Lewis pointed to a series of more recent marks. These appeared 2 nights ago. They seem to indicate movement to the west, toward the more remote areas of the ridge. The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. Each of those present perceived in their own way that they were facing something unprecedented in human history, the emergence of a new form of consciousness, not created by gods or evolutionary chance, but born from human intervention that now escaped its creator's control. "We need to report this," Dr. Mitchell finally murmured, his voice betraying a deep internal conflict. "The commission needs to know." "And what will happen afterward?" Caroline gently questioned. "Hunts? Captures? More experiments?" Helen stepped forward, her face illuminated by the scientific determination that had always guided her. "Dr. Mitchell, we're facing a historic choice. We can pursue these beings, trying to control and study them as objects, or we can recognize that, intentionally or not, we helped create a new form of intelligent life that deserves the opportunity to find its own destiny." The commission representative seemed genuinely disturbed by the idea. But what if they represent a danger? What if they multiply? The implications for the ecosystem, for human society itself. They've already demonstrated they're wiser than many of us, Maggie gently interrupted. They chose isolation instead of confrontation, communication instead of conflict. Ernest, who had observed everything in silence until then, placed a hand on Dr. Mitchell's shoulder. "Richard, I've known you for many years. I know you're a man guided by ethics as much as by science. Think carefully about the report you'll present. There are moments in history when we need the humility to take a step back and observe." The midday sun now bathed the group with its golden light. A gentle breeze swayed the vegetation around them, bringing with it the aroma of earth and wildflowers. From somewhere distant, beyond the hills that marked the horizon, came a sound. Not a common buffalo bellow, but something more complex, almost musical in its cadence. They all raised their eyes, instinctively searching for the source of that call that seemed to transcend barriers between species. They saw nothing beyond the white clouds sailing through the blue sky, but they felt, each in their own way, that they weren't alone. Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath before speaking. "The report will mention that no conclusive evidence was found regarding the whereabouts of the animals," he finally declared. "And I'll recommend that the Headwaters Ridge area be declared a protected ecological reserve, with access limited to authorized researchers." Maggie smiled, gratitude overflowing in her gaze. "A wise decision, Doctor." As they returned to the main house, the group maintained a contemplative silence. The implications of what they had witnessed and the decisions made were too profound to be processed quickly. Back on the porch, observing the sun that was beginning its gradual descent toward the horizon, Caroline expressed the thought that lingered in everyone's mind. "It's strange to think that in our quest to control nature, we ended up creating something that reminds us how limited that control is." Helen nodded, her eyes lost in the distant landscape. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson of all, that life in its deepest essence will always find a way to express itself, to evolve, to transcend the limits we try to impose. That night, as the stars appeared one by one in the South Cross sky, Maggie remained on the porch long after everyone else had retired. Contemplating the darkness that embraced her ranch, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. Somewhere, in the distant mountains, Star and his companions were beginning an unprecedented journey, not as animals subjected to human will, but as conscious beings charting their own destiny. And although she knew she would probably never see again the magnificent buffalo she had raised from young, Maggie smiled into the night, feeling that somehow, inexplicably, a connection would forever remain between them. The wind whispered through, the leaves of the ancient trees surrounding the house, bringing with it promises of a new dawn, not just for Hope Ranch, but for the understanding of life itself and the infinite possibilities it holds.